Nope, didn't need that one. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ian Morrison. I'm the chair of the Cowichan Valley Regional District. I'd like to welcome you all to our regular meeting of Wednesday, June the 26th. Just before we get underway, I'd like to note that this meeting is taking place in the territory of the Coast Salish people, especially our friends Cowichan tribes. I'd like to remind everyone to, if you have an electronic device, to please put it on silent or vibrate. And just one other note for those of you that are in the front row of the gallery to please use caution when you're moving around there. I'm told that the feet of the dividers can be problematic, so we just want everyone to stay safe. And with that, I am looking to have approval of the agenda, but I've been informed that there's a couple of items that directors would like to have added. I'll go to Director Yanni DiNardo first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a time-sensitive item that we had spoken about electoral area services a few times, and it would be a UBCM resolution, another one to add to. We already have one on our agenda.
All right, are there any other items? I've had an email request from Director Smith, who isn't here today, but in discussions with staff, I'm told that it could be appropriately considered at a future meeting. I don't know if she's emailed anyone else, but at this point, I'll turn to Alternate Director Taylor. Would you like that item to be added to the agenda?
Yes, please, Mr. Chair, because I think there's a degree of time sensitivity to it as well.
All right, so we have two items. Can we do one resolution with both those items added? So could I have a motion? That item is, I have it before me right here. It's a director's report that asking that the CVRD's MIA insurance coverage be extended to the Saltaire Family Fun Day on August 18th. So motion to approve the agenda with those two items. Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Alternate Director Taylor. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? We have Director McGonigal and Director Stone opposed. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item on the agenda is adoption of the minutes, and the recommendation before you is that the minutes of the regular board meeting of June 12th, 2019 be adopted.
Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Toporowski. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? I see none opposed. That motion carries. Alternate Director Taylor, can you turn your microphone off, please? Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There is no business arising from the minutes, so we move to public input period.
Is there anyone in the gallery that would like to provide input to the board on items on today's agenda? Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. I'm Cliff Evans from Shawnigan Lake. Mr. Chair, on the agenda today, I see that the Department of Transport is going to give you a presentation, and I've looked at the support material, and in the support material, it shows all sorts of alternate ways to come over the Malahat. But I haven't seen in there an emergency route to solve a problem that we have right now. And from hiking over the Malahat many times, I see from the end of the Gulfstream Road to Langford, and that's also Gulfstream plus new subdivision they have in there. We only need about 10 kilometers of road to join up. The problem seems to be the watershed, and I wonder and the problem of the watershed is because of the marbled murrelet that stay in the old growth trees. On our hiking, I've seen very few old growth trees in there now, so it would be interesting if this if this board could maybe ask the Department of Transport while they're here, if we could maybe have an emergency route put in through there. It runs pretty well parallel to the railway tracks. The road's already and you can drive it now, but it would have to be vastly improved. But 10 kilometers, it would be a great emergency route for the people on this side of the Malahat. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to provide input to the board today on items on today's agenda? Welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for the announcement about the tripping hazard at the front of the gallery here. Mr. Chair, can I speak to an item from CR2 from the Electoral Area Services that's going to be?
Anything on today's agenda?
Thank you. I want to speak to the harmonization plan for the area. In November, the board approved, or sorry, the ESC approved and the board subsequently granted that the plans for area E, F, and H would be considered as part of the official community plan harmonization process. Subsequent to that, there was questions brought about the legalities or legal complexities of doing so. I wonder if those have been resolved to this point, because the area E, and I'm not sure about area H, they remain in draft form, so it's not a complete harmonization of existing OCPs. And I would like that, maybe that could be discussed. I'd also like to recognize the very good work that Ms. Breen is doing with the APCs, and that the fact that it is now going out to the broader APCs, because at our last meeting there was a lot of concern about the pressures put on a single person representing their electoral areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to provide input to the board today on today's agenda? Excellent. We'll move on to the next item, and that brings us to delegations. And just prior to our first delegation coming up, I would like to look to the board for an extension of the 10-minute period of time for them to make their presentation. Would someone move that? Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Alternate Director Justice. All those in favor? Any opposed? See none opposed, motion carries. Mr. Pearson, welcome.
Good afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mike Pearson. I'm the District Manager of Transportation for Highways on Vancouver. Today, thank you for your time. We wanted to take an opportunity to present to you guys about where we are at with the South Vancouver Island Multimodal Transportation Plan. We have Urban Systems, John Steiner here today to speak to the details of where we're at with the plan, but we wanted to make sure that we're touching base with you guys to get your feedback and hear about where we're going with this. I'll jump in a little bit later to speak to the question that was raised about the Malahat and emergency detours, but in the interest of time, I'll pass it over to John to take it from here.
Good afternoon, everyone. Pleased to be here. Been a while. So, as Michael mentioned, I will go through. It's generally an overview of the plan and the process itself, what's included, the intent, the area, as well as, since we've been doing work for a little while, I'll maybe provide some highlights as I go through this. but I will proceed fairly quickly through it. So just for an overview purpose, we'll give you highlights of the study area, the purpose of the study, a little bit of context in terms of what some of the drivers are for the study, and what's shaping some of our the goals. A little bit of a background for our team that's doing a lot of the work, as well as the preliminary process. And the idea was to ensure that there are touch points throughout the process with yourselves, as well as with the CRD Transportation Committee through this process, in addition to other stakeholders that I'll mention in a bit. So in terms of the overall process itself, the intent here is to ensure that we have a good understanding of current conditions and future pressures that are facing travel within the South Island area, as well as growth pressures. The intent here is that we look at all conditions from demographics right through to the actual conditions themselves for all modes relative to safety, mobility, reliability, condition, asset condition, and so on. The intent here is that we do have a good grasp of what are the core issues we're trying to address that relate to overall aspirations for the transportation in the South Island area, and broader aspirations as well. That anything that goes forward are well aligned with those core issues and challenges, and always looking for input on those as well. The third part is to examine historical and new multimodal opportunities. There's a lot of work that has been done historically, not just on the Malahat in terms of alternatives and transportation alternatives that I'll highlight, and it's part of the slide deck package, I think, that hopefully you have. But there's other plans that have been put in place over the years that have been working towards it, whether it's on the Pat Bay Highway, Highway 14, or otherwise some new initiatives that are coming up as well. The idea is to bring all of these and bundle them back. It includes infrastructure, services, programs, as well as policies that may shape transportation and travel within the South Island area. The final part of the plan is to develop a plan with priority actions, and I'll speak to that in a bit. The study area for the plan itself is what you see here, is referred to as the South Island area, from south of Duncan and east of Souk, and much of the area right down through to the core area of Victoria. The highlights here are to really recognize some of the critical regional, provincial, and even international gateways, or national gateways to and from the island, in terms of what some of those drivers are, to recognize some of the regional nodes that are shaping interregional travel across the South Island, and many of the demands that are in place today, as well as what's expected in future, and recognition of a need to connect up with First Nation communities throughout this process, as well as with facilities and services that are explored within the plan itself. So the intent here is that we're looking at movement of people, goods, and services throughout the plan itself. So this just gives you a bit of context on this slide here in terms of many of the historic possibilities that are all on the table through this exercise. And the intent here is to serve interregional travel, that many of these are historic options that have been examined. As I said, whether it be crossings of the North Peninsula, improvements to the Malahat that also include realignments, the ENN corridor, commuter rail, express bus services, ferry services, including Mill Bay to Brentwood, or West Shore services that have recently come up in some of the work that's being done by PC Ferries. Highway 14 realignment and widenings in different areas, as well as transit priority and express bus services. Highway 1 operational improvements, as well as services for rapid transit and expanding priority treatments through that corridor. And Highway 17, which I mentioned earlier, which has had a plan done for several years, actually 2 iterations of that plan, for grade separation as well as services for rapid transit. Beyond that, the plan will also consider active transportation in terms of interregional connections, both with within the corridors themselves to connect up interregionally, as well as kind of the first mile, last mile type of support infrastructure and services that could be put in place. Also consideration in this plan are some of the TDM, or Transportation Demand Management initiatives, and some of the areas of new mobility that we may need to plan for in this process. In terms of other context pieces, and there's several policies, and the intent here is just to recognize there are several provincial, regional, and municipal policies that are going to be recognized through this process. The intent is not to replace any of those. The intent is to increase and support many of those that are speaking to aspirations beyond transportation, whether it be commitments to communities and connecting communities, or the overall economy for the island and the South Island area in particular, climate action, in terms of reduced greenhouse gases and the movement towards alternative fuels. Within the process itself, it's generally governed with existing provincial policies, as well as a recent active transportation strategy that was brought forward by the provincial government over the last month or so. As I said, the intent is not to replace, but intent is to support and see where there is alignment. And I can tell you from the work that we've done so far, there's quite a bit of alignment between provincial policies around some of those themes: economy, climate change, transportation, and communities, that are basically, I won't say reiterated, but they're basically mirroring many of the regional plans in terms of aspirations for those 4 particular areas. It's also enabling some of the regional transportation strategies that you've been part of developing, whether it be through BC Transit's future plans, and some of the folks from BC Transit, if you don't recognize, they're here today as well as some of your own master plans around walking and cycling and the trails plan that you have in place today. So the intent is to reinforce what's already in place today. The team that is together on this as Urban Systems is the lead. I'm the project manager on behalf of Urban Systems. We've done a lot of work on multimodal plans throughout the province, including on the island, including in this region. And we have sub-consultants with us who are specialists in various areas, from highways, transit, active transportation, rail, ferry services, and major bridge crossings. So again, I think it's important that you know who is on that team. That wasn't meant to promote the team. In addition to, we have a group called Context Research, which is also on the team with respect to communications and engagement. The process itself is a 5-phase process, and we're in phase 1. We've been working on this for a little while, and I'll maybe just highlight probably where this plan is going first, phases 3 through 5. Essentially, the intent of the plan is to ensure that we can zero in on what are some medium-term priority actions that can be advanced over the next 10 plus or minus years. And that we go through a process of evaluating those, but in order to get there, we need to identify and look at some of those big ideas that I referred to earlier in terms of long-term, all of the possibilities that are out there that have been looked at historically that can be redefined in addition to adding to some of those historic ideas and plans. But all of them are on the table to develop essentially a short list, or at least versions of it that can be implemented and advanced over the next 10 years as part of a plan. In order to get there is the first phase, which is the transportation snapshot, where we come to understand some of the backdrop to some of the policies that I mentioned earlier that you have that are in place provincially, in addition to some community profiles, the transportation systems that currently exist, the conditions assessment, as well as the forecasts that we're looking at for travel within the South Island. But the important part of this phase is that we identify what are the key issues and challenges that we're dealing with across the island. So that when we develop that, when we look at those 10-year initiatives, we're actually focused on what's going to help to address some of those core issues. Which issues are rising to the top in terms of the most critical issues to connect the South Island area today and over the next 10 to 20 years. The second phase of the program, as I said, will consider all of those options: highway, bridges, passenger ferry, and so forth, but more in a multimodal capacity. In other words, we're not trying to put silos around these. In many cases, they're serving multi-modes, and there may be priorities around modes in areas where you want to move more people and goods and not just vehicles. So there'll be areas where we look towards bolstering existing plans and bolstering what's possible to achieve some of those overall commitments towards things like climate action as well as sustainable transportation. In order to get there, though, we need to screen out some of the options early on. We'll need to consider some of the big ticket items or the big ideas, screen some of them out. For those that are looking promising for the medium term, they'll get into phase 3, into an evaluation process. In some cases, those that make it through to that phase are essentially those that you can say are going to be needed in the long term anyways, and would be evaluated through the next phase of the process. So the idea is what will remain part of the plan. The intent is also not to sit around to debate the next 20 years or so around major improvements, and because again, the idea is to develop an action plan with implementation and priorities. The third phase, as I mentioned, is developing those options. We'll refine some of them. In some cases, we'll look at what can be phased, how it could be phased, what makes it possible. and breaking that out with ministry guidance, with input and guidance from various stakeholders, including yourselves, and coming back and following through the process. There are some parallel initiatives going on that I'll ask Mike to speak to with Highway 1 and the ENN corridor.
Yeah, so with the Malahat segment detour route planning, this is something that was announced at the same time as this plan. And it's something that we're just in the final stages of wrapping up that study. That study looked at emergency detour route options for the Malahat, and it looked at a wide variety of options to look at how could we, in an emergency situation, detour the Malahat in a more convenient way than the Pacific Marine Circle route, which is really the only realistic opportunity right now. So that report is just about finished. I expect it to be released within the next month. As I say, we've been working closely with the CRD in terms of how that may impact the watershed and what that looks like. So there's a bunch of options coming out there that I think will answer some of the questions that have been raised. The ENN corridor, or the Island Railway Corridor condition assessment, that is also currently underway. That is to look at the feasibility of what it would take to a condition assessment of the railway, I guess is a better way to say that, and kind of get a better baseline conditions assessment and the cost of that. Excuse me. So that's underway right now and will be wrapped up this fall. So again, there will be another report coming out. Both of these parallel initiatives will be included in some shape or form into the South Island plan.
So there's just one more slide to speak to, which is around engagement and communication. As I said, there's many parties that are engaged throughout the process. It is largely a technical process of a lot of work that's been done in previous engagement. And so it's the engagement is and communications is largely centered on the agencies that are principally drivers of this, no pun intended, drivers of this process, and speaking with yourselves through the process at key milestones, the CRD board or committees of for transportation, in addition to the commission. Beyond that, there's work at a staff level with a technical advisory group that has been established, again, to meet at specific milestones throughout the process that'll take us through to March 2020 or the spring of 2020. And there's also engagement and reach out programs with First Nation communities that want to participate in the process itself at various stages, in addition to other stakeholders that would be more one-on-one discussions throughout the process. So that's the communications and engagement program in a nutshell, and gives you a sense of the overall process that we're going through. And as I said, we've been probably working at this for the last month and a half. So back to you, Chair.
Excellent, and I've already got somebody who would like to pose a question to you, so I hope you're both ready for it. Director Sebring.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of things jumped off the page for me as I was listening to you. The first is I find it interesting that Highway 14 is part of the consultation process, and yet not that long ago, the Premier, whose riding encompasses that, announced some major upgrades to Highway 14. How are those things related? I'm not criticizing the Premier, but I'm trying to figure out if we can do a major capital upgrade in the middle of a review, what the relationship between those two are. I have one more question, but I'll leave this one first. Well, this is a political table. I'm sorry. I just... He's looking at
What was
me.
your question specifically? Why is Highway 14 included in it?
Well, I mean, how, given the fact that we're going to do a major upgrade to Highway 14, how does that impact this study? Let me put it that way.
Right. Well, I guess the major upgrade to Highway 14 that was announced just recently, the four-laning and median barrier, that's actually a result of, well, planning work that's been going on for the last 2 or 3 years, completely unrelated to the study we're doing now. How it feeds into it is it fits, again, with mobility and everything else that we're trying to solve with this study. So unrelated in terms of pre-announcing projects that, that would be based on this, but it's based on previous planning work.
Second question, if I may. It goes to phase two, as you identified it here, with respect to long-term opportunities, and I see the commuter rail option is in there. And I know there's the parallel E&N condition assessment being done. Mayor Stone and Chair Morrison and myself, and I think Mayor Staples was there as well. In December, we were down at in Victoria, meeting with the Premier and the Transportation Minister, along with a whole bunch of other mayors and regional district chairs from up and down the E&N corridor, as well as First Nations representation from all the First Nations that have that corridor crossing their lands. And the Island Corridor Foundation was there, and the room was unanimous that this needs to be addressed and soon, and all we get instead is a study. Again, it's a bit of a political question, but you know, given the incredible support that the rail has up and down the island, is there any way that you can predict what this commuter rail options bullet may look like? Is it just commuter rail, or is it broader? Because I heard you talk about priorities to move more people and goods throughout the region, and to me that would be rail among others.
I was like, I think that is a tricky one to answer right now.
I have two tricky questions. I'm sorry.
And it is quite political. You know, what we've been asked to do is complete the condition assessment. So we have the information to inform decisions. At this point, you know, as John sort of alluded to, everything's on the table. So having a better understanding of the corridor, maybe there's ideas out there that we could explore, but I think that's as far as I can go with this.
Is one of the options with respect to the corridor and the discussion about the emergency detour route in the Malahat, is that on the table to say we'll just make the rail bed possibly the alternative? Are you thinking about that? Because that would shut down rail. I'm just trying to, yeah. Are you thinking about that?
As part of the Malahat work that we've been doing, alignments, including the E&N corridor, have been looked at as part of that study. So yeah, it hasn't been, okay. It's been considered.
Political input, don't do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Stone.
Thank you, Director Sebring, for warming it up for me. So I just need to make a comment. I don't think these are political questions. These are just, I think, frustrations that go back years and years about transportation policy on Vancouver Island, and the fact that it always seems to be on the near horizon, and then we're always chasing the dragon, so to speak, and solving the issues, because every time we take action, by the time the action's complete, we're back in the same situation. So I appreciate that the government and the transportation team are looking at this. So the questions are, you say this is, you know, a 10-year strategy, but I'm sure hopeful that we're looking 20, 30 years out in terms of transportation needs and making the investments over this 10 years to address those issues. Is that kind of what the terms of reference or the goals of this planning process are?
Sure. Yeah, we are looking at that over the next 20 years. What are the demand patterns going to look like? How are they going to change interregionally? So, for example, there's just using a part of this is there's about 80,000 trips that come in and out of this area every day. People trips, whether it be through the. So the idea is, what are going to be the game changers in terms of what the future of the next 20 years hold? How do you respond to that with some of the modes? And as you say, some of them from previous work have said that over the next 20 years, this is what would be the diversion. That's what we're going to be looking at. That's what we'll be reporting out even in phase 2, what some of those big items will look like in 20 years.
So I guess the goal is that things like the Mackenzie interchange, which will be saturated by the time it's in proper use, are being planned further out so that we're actually making transportation infrastructure that doesn't become a bottleneck on the day it opens, right? So we're looking further out at those demand patterns to make sure we're actually addressing it.
Yeah, I think even in that case, that has a 20-year lens on it, and some of the areas around it, because it's just one interchange, will experience some of the congestion that you're referring to.
Right. So if I may, this is just one kind
Final
of thought.
remark, sure.
Thank you. And I guess it's because, you know, for those of us who have been following this for years and years, and in some cases decades, keep kind of putting forward that we need more forward-looking transportation policy. It doesn't seem to get gravity with the planning processes that go on, and then the predicted sort of deficiencies always seem to come to fruition. Yet when we look at transportation policy, specifically outside of Vancouver Island, more broadly outside of North America, there's a dramatic shift. And I used to say it's forward-looking, but in some ways it's backward-looking. But things like rail, moving people and goods by a more efficient way that's more effective and friendly to the climate, as well as more effective and friendly to reducing the costs and burdens on roads, improve safety. We've transitioned on Vancouver Island, even in my short lifetime, from moving goods on rail through Vancouver Island to putting those on trucks on highways, which of course we know means highways need more maintenance, it costs a lot more money. And it's a lot less safe as a percentage when you look at the fatal accident statistics. They're usually related to heavier vehicles meeting up with more passenger vehicles, and more moving goods and people off the roadways is both safer, more convenient, lower cost, and better for the environment. So when I see Clean BC logos and things on our transportation policy presentations, I'm really hopeful that at some point we'll look a little bit further afield in terms of transportation policy and actually come forward with solutions that aren't just building wider roads, trying to cram more cars onto streets, and actually moving people out of cars and into mass transit options that seem to work well everywhere else. But we're always given reasons why there's not enough people here or whatever. But as we can see by your presentation, especially in the South End, there should be enough critical mass there in terms of population to achieve those policy goals. So I guess the last sort of bit of input that I would have is that I'm just hopeful that in this sort of last stage of working with the CVRD, it says in consulting with local governments, that those consultations are actually done in earnest and in good faith. Because I think we've been asked for our opinions many, many times. Director Sebring, Mayor Sebring just referred to one of them. And then at the end of those meetings, we're kind of told why we're not that doesn't make sense to the people within the ministry. And I think it's frustrating when the communities up and down the island are calling for more forward-looking transportation policy and investments, and yet the actions that we see seem to say that studies like this, and I'm a huge fan of so many things that are being done within the government right now, but processes like this seem to be a way at the end of the process to say, okay, as we were, and continuing to invest in the kind of transportation policies that have put us in these positions rather than providing long-term solutions. So it's not really a question, it's just some input, and I hope that the engagement is legitimate and that they actually listen to the local communities up and down that want to see a change in the way that we move people and goods, and that means getting cars off of the road, getting people out of cars, and more people to more equitable in terms of incomes and equality, better for the environment, and really better financial investments. If you want to try something new, this is the best place to do it in terms of progressive transportation policy. So thanks for giving me the latitude on the rant, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Director Stone, and I'll just insert a real brief question before I go to Director Salmon. Do you have a hard date for delivery of this report?
No, we don't have a hard date yet. Right now, we're saying the end of at the spring of 2020. So we're looking at March. Not a hard date, other than to say March.
It'd be real neat if you could hit March, because there's all the elected officials are getting together in April at AVICC and Nanaimo. It'd be a good place to roll something like this out. Director Salmon?
Thank you. Very similar question. Is that no hard date for the Malahat emergency detour either?
Oh, Malahat emergency detour, that should be in the next 3 to 4 weeks. That report will be coming out.
And a decision would be due? What's the time frame for that?
That's to be determined still.
Okay, thank you.
Director Staples?
I'd just like to echo what Mayor Stone Director Stone and Director Sebring spoke to. When I see the commuter rail, I can feel all the hairs go up on the back of my neck, because I know it means different things to different people. So I think how we express language is really important when it comes to something like this, because commuter rail means something different perhaps to people north of Langford than it does to people south. And so I'd like to make sure that those things are addressed in this.
Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Questions already been asked by Director Salmon.
Excellent. Looking around the room, don't see any other hands. I want to thank you both for coming and your posse for coming today and presenting this information to us. And I'm sure that if directors have any other questions or input that they will be able to get in touch with you and provide that. So once again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up, delegation number 2, Martin Paul, Crystal Martin, in regards to 5G electromagnetic radiation. You have 10 minutes. Will that be sufficient time? Well, 10 minutes for your presentation. Is that enough time? Excellent.
Oh, thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. I have a rather different agenda here. I'm here to atone for the sins of my father. My father was a master tradesman. He worked as an engineering technician for RCA Victor, that's the Radio Corporation of America, under contract to NASA. From the mid-1950s until he retired in 1974, he helped to design, build, and install satellite tracking stations, antennas, around the world, including the first one at Teleglobe in Yubo. It was dismantled a few years ago, but many more have taken its place. Now, I've sent an email giving a photograph of that. From the timing, I suspect that his installations at Teleglobe and Telesat were the precursor to Reagan's Star Wars, and right now it provides onboard Wi-Fi for Boeing. According to a Statistics Canada interviewer, the Lake Cowichan area has the dubious honor of having the highest number of people self-medicating for undiagnosed illnesses in all of British Columbia, if not in Canada. I am not surprised. Pop used to come home and tell us how dangerous microwaves are, and they have not changed. If anything, they've gotten worse. There must have been incidents at work for him to even mention it, because the whole project was considered top secret. Since World War II, the military has known about radar or radio room sickness. Radio waves would literally evaporate the mercury out of the sailors' dental amalgams and send it directly to their brain. And they required frequent replacement fillings. Now it's called electrohypersensitivity. I am electrosensitive. It started after carpenter ants came to my housewarming party in March of 1977. The exterminator I hired used a banned commercial fungicide, which I didn't know, because there weren't any regulations. He called it Calachlor. In 2007, now that was 1997 that I got sprayed. In 2007, after about 20 doctors diagnosed me as stressed, depressed, codependent, and you gotta love this one, menopausal. Then I had my amalgams removed and replaced with ceramics. And then I had 5 years of chelation therapy. And then I discovered that Calachlor was actually mercuric chloride. It's a banned commercial fungicide, as I said, and it's never meant to be used inside. Now, I also emailed the material safety data sheet. I couldn't sue because there were no regulations saying that he had to name the product that he'd used on my bill or give me a material safety data sheet. On that MSDS, the only symptoms I have not had so far are lung and brain cancer, and last year I had a brain cancer scare. So if you think I'm not highly invested in this, think again. Just as there are no pesticide management regulations, there are no microwave management regulations. Health Canada Safety Code 6 refers to properly shielded military men who have thicker bone density than women to start with. They're bigger and they can tolerate more external pollution. And not to the normal person in just average daytime clothing. Safety Code 6 does not apply to anyone using a laptop, a cell phone, an iPad, Bluetooth, or a microwave oven. It does not apply to police officers holding handheld radar guns in their laps, because a lot of them got prostate cancer. Before my doctor retired, he had the first case of penis cancer. And I said, where does he carry his cell phone? And he just about fainted. He turned really, really pale, because that's where he carries his cell phone. Safety Code 6 does not protect pregnant women or their fetuses. Safety Code 6 does not protect Canadians, period. Now, chelation got rid of most of the mercury, but when VIU rolled out Wi-Fi, I started feeling sick, but only in certain buildings. I used an old desktop computer at home, and I had no idea why I had to avoid the library and the cafeteria. They'd been rebuilt, they had new fluorescent lights, wireless computers, kids on their laptops and cell phones. I just knew that I felt like I was being mercury poisoned again. I had brain fog, dizziness, nausea, blurred vision, ringing in my ears, and that was just the beginning. And I thought, wow, I don't know what's going on here, but not good. So you also have a copy, or you should have, by email, Public Health SOS. That's about 124-page PDF. And you'll see lists of symptoms there for symptoms related to the 2009 levels of microwave radiation. Did you know that exposing staff to class 2B carcinogens, which microwave radiation is, the World Health Organization decided that in 2011, that it's a WCB violation? Did you know that under the Nuremberg Treaty, it is illegal to do medical testing on subjects unless they have been given full disclosure and have given informed consent? Now that's fully informed consent, not just, oh, by the way, we're doing this. Now, as frequencies and exposure levels increase, symptoms become more pronounced. I know personally, 4 men, aged 21 to 71, who died in high microwave environments of cardiac events, atrial fibrillation, electrical short circuits in their heart. The 21-year-old had known sleep apnea, and he died in his sleep. The 71-year-old died after a night spent feeling weak and fluttery. He didn't know what was wrong and didn't think it was a big deal. Of course, he was a man. His wife, in the meantime, was panicking. She's my best friend. I know 2 people in their late 50s who died of bowel cancer after years of using laptops and all things wireless. Linda was my closest friend. Both of these women were healing touch practitioners, so you'd think if anybody could feel energetic differences, they could. No. I know a healthy, happy woman who was a salesperson at the Salvation Army in Nanaimo, who became severely depressed after buying her first cell phone. She loved it so much, she put it under her pillow to act as her alarm clock. Her doctor eventually put her on antidepressants, but she still won't give up her smartphone. My good friend Bev had only a decked cordless phone in a 3,000 square foot house. She kept the base station beside her bed. Her nightmares, disturbed sleep, brain fog, and lack of energy cleared up within a few days of replacing her cordless phone with a corded one. Her asthma, irritable bowel, and eczema resolved with a couple of weeks of chelation. Her husband grumbled about tripping over the cord, but then realized how much quieter the house felt and how much better he was sleeping.
Crystal, you've got 2.5 minutes left.
I'm almost there. They now live off-grid in Manitoba. For over 20 years, I've lived like a hermit. First, mercury made me crazy. Mad Hatter's disease is real. And then, after I retired for health reasons, Wi-Fi and cell phone radiation drove me back inside my home, which I rewired to make it safer for myself. I bought a protective bed shield made of copper, silver, and cotton mesh, just so I could sleep without being affected by my neighbor's cordless toys. Now that I'm finally venturing out again, I can tell you that dying of loneliness is not just a poetic metaphor. It is real. Try it sometime. With 5G, there will be no place to hide. It penetrates everything. Where will I go? For that matter, where will you go? You won't have anywhere to go either. No one has done studies yet on 5G except the US military, who bought Nikola Tesla's patents and made them top secret. They use it for crowd control. 5G causes the skin to become painfully hot, with radiation burns. Imagine a world where every telephone pole has the ability to cause radiation burns or worse. Dr. Paul will show you what our love affair with current technology is already producing and an idea of what 5G could add. I invite you, I implore you, please come to one of Dr. Paul's presentations. There is a list on ceth.ca. You may have trouble finding it, it's being hidden. Don't use Google. You, at the municipal level, are our first line of defense. That's your job, to protect the people in your constituencies. You cannot do your jobs if you don't know the danger. Please educate yourselves, and please protect us and yourselves. And that is my presentation. There will be 3 meetings in the local area, in Duncan at the United Church on July 2nd, in Victoria at Emmanuel Baptist Church on July 3rd, and in Nanaimo on the 4th at the Catholic Church downtown. And I have brought my RF meter, and I would be glad to demonstrate just how high the radiation levels are in here because I'm buzzing.
Thank you very much, Crystal. Does the board have any questions for the delegation today? Alternate Director Taylor.
Sure.
Hang on a second. Is it the desire of the committee to proceed with this? Or board,
Don't
sorry?
worry, it won't hurt. It's okay, it doesn't hurt. Now this meter is a cheap one. It's only about $1,000 when I bought it.
Please proceed.
You're well over 2,000 in here, and the safe reading by European standards is less than 10.
Great, thank you very much. Any further questions for the delegation? Seeing none, thank you very much for attending today and bringing the information to our attention. Could you leave the information in regards, or you've already emailed the information in regards to where the meetings are taking place to us, so.
I've emailed everything.
We can make sure it's provided to directors and alternates.
I'm surprised. That's one, yes.
So,
I'm surprised, you guys, because this is way more important than transportation. This is your life. This is your life. You could die, like just gone. Or you could end up like me. This is not fun. This is not fun. You guys got to understand this.
thank you very much, Crystal.
By the way, while I'm packing this up, if you go up to Teleglobe,
Crystal,
Yes.
we have to move on to our next item on
just
the
packing.
agenda, please.
I'm packing.
So the next item is a report from the chairperson. I've got some information to share with the board today. We have, there's in no particular order, but I was in attendance at National Aboriginal Day over at the CM Lalem Gym, and was glad to see a good turnout, and it was a great event, and they've had some great work done in their community, and I think we're fortunate to have such an engaged and community neighbors that celebrated, and it was a really neat thing to see. And Coast Capital Savings Credit Union is moving to make a big presence in the community as well, and is a partner of theirs. Wanted to also mention that there was a really informative Freedom of Information, Protection of Privacy webinar here yesterday that if you, a number of us were in attendance, but I would strongly suggest that those of you that weren't here or weren't able to attend the webinar, I think it might have been available in some of the other municipal governments, you might want to ask our corporate secretary for that information. It was very informative, and the FOIPA legislation goes a lot further than a lot of us might think, and so I would suggest that you avail yourself of that information.
And that webinar recording is still available online?
It's
Just
available for
information.
2 weeks, I
2 weeks,
believe. Next item, this is a real great bit of good news, but Director Sebring and I were able to attend a really great event on Saturday. We were up in North Oyster. They have the shiniest, nicest, roomiest, modern fire hall that I think in the entire regional district, maybe the south end of the island, and it was a really well-organized event. Staff did a fantastic job. Director Marcotte has been working that particular project for in excess of 20 years, and I thought it was a fantastic event, and it's very well deserved. And I think we should give Director Marcotte a little round of applause for all that great work. I have a couple of items too that I want to share in regards to the Best in the Valley that appeared in the Cowichan Valley Citizen last Wednesday, and this is kind of neat to note that the best place for a picnic, the top three are: first, Bright Angel Park, Cowichan Valley Regional District Sub-Regional Park. Second, in the wonderful town of Ladysmith, is Transfer Beach. And third is the Stony Hill Regional Park, another CVRD regional park. It's a CVRD regional park. Best playground, first went to our friends in Ladysmith again, Transfer Beach. Second was Bright Angel Park. And third was the Glenora Trailhead Park. So that's pretty good news. And the best weekend activity, 1, 2, and 3 were the Kinsall Trestle, part of the Cowichan Valley Regional Trail. And second and third were the Duncan Farmers Market and the Cowichan Valley Wine Tour. So I just wanted to say thank you to all those people that participated and voted on that. And I think that that's kudos to the organization and to the staff and our member municipalities for their hard work in making this such a great place to live. And lastly, I want to report that later on today, between 6 and 7, I will be attending a private managed forest lands program review session with staff Kate Miller, and we will be taking some information forward in regards to an interesting scope of inquiry that they're making. And this will be a preliminary where we'll be going into really find out what they're really wanting input on. They've given us a whole bunch of criteria as to what they don't want input on. And then the regional district through its staff will be making a formal submission to the program. So I've got the information here if anybody wants to have a look at it. This is a pre-arranged by invitation only. And if any of you would like to have something included in the discussion today, please see me before you leave today. And should be a pretty interesting session. Director Sebring.
Just a question, when it comes to CVRD input on that as we move forward, will that input be provided from the board, or is it up to individual directors to go online and do it, or whatever that looks like?
There's a couple of different opportunities. I believe there's a website where you can engage, but seeing that the electoral areas are so impacted by private managed forest land activities that it was decided that we would make the formal pitch to engage and then make a formal presentation. So I believe individuals can, but I think going forward as a group is going to be more impactful.
Because I heard you say staff would make submissions. I'm just wondering what the role of the board is in that.
We will likely bring a report back as to what the final submission would be. That's my preferred way to go. So that concludes my report to the board, and that will bring us to item 7 on the agenda. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Under correspondence, item C1 is UBCM 2019 UBCM convention, the provincial appointment book and meeting, and the recommendation, even though it reads as information, it's actually for direction.
My understanding is that previous protocol has been if there's a desire to meet with a specific minister, it's done through Ms. Nelson upstairs, that the bookings will be made. We will send delegations, that that individual directors don't generally go and attend, and on behalf, individual directors can make appointments to meet with staff. Director Sebring.
This has come up, or is coming up at our table, and I was discussing it with our senior staff just yesterday in terms of some of the meetings North Cowichan might want to have. And one of the suggestions was, do we want to have another meeting on the hospital? And I said, probably would be better to let the regional district take the lead on that, and I'd like to tag along. Just sort of putting that out there, if there is a plan to meet on the hospital issue, that North Cowichan would like to be at that table.
Thank you. Director Staples.
And I think the deadline is the end of June, or July, I mean, is that correct, from what I remember? This will be on our next committee of the whole agenda at the city as well. And one of the things that I'm hoping that our council discusses and is those places where maybe we should be coming together to meet. And so maybe if we can all bring that back to the next board meeting and then discuss that in terms of carrying things forward, or I'm not sure, or somehow get that to the regional district and to each other. I just feel like that might be beneficial to the work that we've been trying to do regionally and making sure we're all in the room.
Makes sense, and I think in the past we've done a great deal of collaboration to make sure that we did have the right people in the room when we were making presentations to various ministers. So I just wanted, Director Stone, go ahead.
So I would just echo the comments of the other two directors, especially around the hospital and transportation. I think we've all had some shared interests in those areas, and if there is meetings with provincial representatives at those ministries, I'm sure that we would be there and collaborate and cooperate with you so that we're all on the same page.
So Ms. Harrison, just in regards to the direction, any suggestions for meetings and topics? Are we going to recommend that we go through Ms. Nelson to take care of that process? Do we need a motion to that effect? We don't need a motion to that effect. So everyone's clear. If you want to have a minister meeting on a specific topic, you make arrangements through Ms. Nelson on the third floor, and just be aware that you can actually attend and meet with staff, and those bookings can be made at the event. So, excellent. Next item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item on the agenda, item C2, and it is a UBCM resolution regarding the electoral area director designation. I'd like to suggest that we also move item NB1 up under this item to be considered in conjunction with it.
I actually have that as a note. So we have B1, which is from Director Yanni Donardo, and I think perhaps we should consider them separately. We've got this item and the other one in regards to boundary extensions, and these are for submission directly to UBCM without going through the area association. And so, pleasure committee, everyone's had a chance to review this one, so I think we can deal with this one first, and then we can go to the new business item afterwards. And maybe I'll sort of take this one. There's been a lot of we should actually have a mover. Do we have a mover and a seconder on this? Moved by Director Sebring, seconded by Director Yanni Donardo. Is there any discussion required on this item or explanation? It's pretty self-explanatory. Especially after what happened at FCR. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. That motion carries. Director Yanni Donardo on NB1.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We had discussed this at electoral area services a few times. I think it got left behind, and Director has brought it back to my attention that the boundary expansion and the resolution that I would like to bring forward is that the UBCM work with the province of British Columbia to amend the Local Government Act, Section 12(3), to alter the discretionary nature of this option and to mandate that the minister be required to direct that a vote on the question of including an area in a municipality under this section be taken in the form specified by the minister. So this came, I'll just.
Hang on, you put that
Yeah,
forward.
Yeah.
Let's get it on the table. Moved by Director Yanni Donardo. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Director Marcotte. Director Yanni Donardo to speak to the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It was, we did look into it, and we really wanted some more, as an electoral area, once again, almost like the motion previously, that we wanted to be acknowledged that as an electoral area that we would be notified, and it says in the act currently that we may be notified, and we were looking for some more concrete solutions to that.
Any other discussion? Everyone clear on the motion? It's been read. Call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? Motion carries. Do we need a motion that they be forwarded to UBCM now that they've both been accepted, or is that automatically gonna happen? So I would just, entertain a motion that those two be forwarded to UBCM directly. Moved by Director Sebring, seconded by Director Stone. Any discussion? Call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? The motion carries. Next item, C3. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is Heritage Programs and Services BC Heritage Branch information. This is for information.
Any questions on this item? Seeing none, next item, Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is information. Item IN1 is a letter from Tristan Caden regarding climate change, and this is for information.
Any questions on this item? Seeing none, number 9.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next items are the committee commission reports, and the first item is CR1, which is the report and recommendations of the Corporate Services Committee meeting of June 12th, 2019.
Who's the Vice Chair, Director of Corporate Services? Anybody remember? Yeah, it's probably, and he's not here.
Oh,
Would you like me to read this?
How about we
Yeah.
have our Deputy Corporate Secretary read that, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The recommendations before you are, number 1, that the public input period policy detailed as attachment D to the Legislative Services Division May 31st, 2019 staff report be approved.
Is there a mover? Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Staples. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? Motion carries.
And number 2, that the public input period policy dated October 11th, 2017 be rescinded.
Moved by Director Yanni Donardo, seconded by Director Justice. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. Next item, CR2. Director Nicholson.
Thanks. Could you explain to me, please, what happened to the other policy decisions that were made at that meeting? There were some other issues that...
My understanding is that, so what Director Nicholson is inquiring about is we had some discussion. These recommendations that were just passed were part of those discussions, but some of them actually involved change to our procedures bylaw. And those actions are in queue being addressed by staff right now and will be brought forward at a subsequent meeting for change under bylaw. That good? Excellent. CR2, Director Yanni Donardo, your report of
Thank you,
June
Mr.
19th.
Chair. I would like to read 1 through 13, but pull 6 and 8. I've been requested to pull 6 and 8 separately. So it'll be 1 through 13 without 6 and 8. Does that make sense, Mr. Chair?
6 and 8 for separate discussion then.
Separate discussion.
Fair enough. Proceed.
Your Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of June 19th recommends, 1, that a grant and aid for electoral area D, Cowichan Bay, in the amount of $500 be provided to Vancouver Island Wind Sports Society to support the 2019 Windfest Festival. 2, that a grant and aid electoral area D, Cowichan Bay, in the amount of $500 be provided to the Cowichan Bay Improvement Association to support Low Tide Day 2019. 3, that a grant and aid electoral area E, Cowichan Station, Satlam, Glenora, in the amount of $1,000 be provided to the Duncan United Church to support the homeless and precariously housed support fund. 4, that a grant and aid electoral area E, Cowichan Station, Satlam, Glenora, in the amount of $300 be provided to the Vancouver Island Wind Sports Society to support Windfest 2019. 5, that a grant and aid electoral area F, Cowichan Lake, Scotts Falls, in the amount of $600 be provided to 75 and Beyond Society to sponsor the opening ceremony drop zone, skydivers, children's festival event, and contest. 7, that the 2019 budget for Function 3.2 Community Planning be amended. 1, to increase transfer from gas tax by $55,000. 2, increase internal recovery allocation parks by $16,500. 3, increase internal recovery allocation EDC by $5,500. 4, increase Shawnigan Village charrette consultant expenses by $89,656. And 5, decrease planning expenditures, consultants expenses by $12,656. 9, that the 2019 budget for Function 576 Engineering Utilities be amended to decrease transfer from gas tax reserves by $7,021. 2, decrease asset management expenditures by $7,021. 3, increase transfer from operational reserves by $27,979. 4, increase transfer to gas tax reserve by $27,979. 10, 1, that the 2019 budget for Function 812 Cobble Hill Village Sewer System be amended to increase transfer federal gas tax funding by $151,334, and 2, increase capital engineering structures by $151,334. And the completion of the Cobble Hill Village Sewer System integration work priority to adoption of the budget amendment be approved. 11.1, 2019 budget for Function 619 Burnham Water System. Increase transfer from operation reserve to $12,000. Increase capital engineering structures by $12,000. The emergency replacement of Burnham Water System deep well pump priority to adoption of the budget amended be approved. 12, that $185,000 of the community works funds allotted to Massachi Sewer System in 2015 be reallocated to Honeymoon Bay Water System for the Well Development and Protection Plan capital project. 2, that 2019 budget for Function 606 Honeymoon Bay Water System to be amended to increase transfer operational taxes by $20,475, decrease operational contingency fund by $20,000, increase transfer from community works funds to $185,000, and increase capital engineering structures by $225,475. The approval to proceed to the expenditure prior to adoption of the budget amendment be given, and that the 2019 budget for Function 640 Saltaire Water System be amended to increase transfer operational reserve funding by $115,000, decrease surplus funding by $115,000, and the approval to proceed with the expenditures prior to adoption of the budget amendment be given. I move those.
Seconded by Director Nicholson. Any discussion on those items? Director Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to confirm that in number 9, we have the decrease and increases correctly allocated.
Decrease.
In number 9, I would assume that this has passed muster and committee once, that these are the correct amounts. Can we have confirmation by staff? It is correct. Any other discussion on these items 1 through 13 excluding 6 and 8? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? There's none opposed. That motion carries. Director Yanni DiNardo, number 6.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Number 6, that short-term borrowing of $35,000 be approved for the purchase of replacement building inspection vehicle under function 320, building inspections to be paid back over 5 years as per the liabilities under the agreement section 175 of the community charter. And 2, that the short-term borrowing of up to $35,000 be approved for the purchase of a new vehicle for the that's a good one, Soils Bylaw Officer under Function 328 to be paid back over 5 years as per the liabilities under the agreement, Section 175 of the Community Charter.
You move that item?
Yes.
Seconded by Director Nicholson. Director Nicholson.
So these are these vehicles that have already been purchased are non-electric vehicles, and I think that it would be wise if I could make a motion after this about developing a fleet management decision tool related to and analyzing greenhouse gas emissions and life cycle costs, because I was very surprised that we're still going to the non-electric model without sort of good supporting evidence that that's the best way to spend our money at this point.
Fair enough. I don't know that it pertains to the resolution that we have before us, but let's deal with the resolution that's on the floor, and then we can go to that concern after we've dealt with this item.
Fine.
Everyone's clear on what this resolution is. This resolution needs to go forward so that the borrowing can be done for the vehicle that's already been purchased. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. Director Nicholson, just before you move forward on this, I do believe staff explained at the meeting that this purchase had gone through a matrix of questions in regards to the suitability of vehicles, and that there is one in place. If you're suggesting that we embark on a different fleet management course and analysis, that I'm not sure that a resolution here is the appropriate place. I'm thinking we almost have to deal with this at our strategic planning. So I look to the committee around the table. We're already doing some of that work. Would it be your desire to maybe perhaps have staff appear to provide us details around how those acquisitions are determined? Director Nicholson.
Right, so I looked into this a little bit, and it seems that there are guidelines in place, but that they're not integrating the greenhouse gas issues with life cycle cost assessments. And so I really think that we need to have a policy around how we manage our fleets that require us to look at our decision-making based on both of those criteria, not just, and I don't think it should be done I think it should be done for the corporation as a whole. And certainly we can discuss that, and I certainly would welcome more information about greenhouse gas kind of stuff that we do, because we have never had a report in my term, either this term or in my previous term, on this particular issue. But I guess I'm not prepared to wait anymore for the strategic planning to come to some conclusion, because I really think that this is something that we're doing right now. We've just bought a couple of vehicles that we're locked into now for 7 to 10 years, and we know we've got greenhouse gas issues. And I have not seen good information brought on that rationalizes why that was appropriate. So
So fair enough. I think at this point, I'd like to address number 8 next, and I think that what would I would suggest is that we have staff come before the next committee meeting, next appropriate committee meeting to give us the rationale for expenditures of this type. We do authorize the budget and vehicle expenditures. Mr. Keeber, do you have something to add?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My only comment would be sounds like Director Nicholson is asking us that we consider the full picture of all the costs associated with these purchases. And it's my understanding that staff do that, but I think it sounds like we need to come back and sort of explain what we do on a more complete basis. And if after that the board would like to come up with or suggest we readdress our fleet management program, then we can do it at that point in time.
So Director Nicholson, would it be appropriate that we have staff come and present their vehicle acquisition strategy and strategy and framework to us, and then we can go from there? Is that sufficient direction to staff? Okay, excellent. Item 8.
That the 2019-2024 gas tax community work funds be allocated as follows. 1, 60% electoral areas. 2, 30% asset management infrastructure investments. And 3, 10% asset management capacity building.
Moving that item. Seconded by Director Sebring. We've got hands all around the room. So I've got alternate Director Taylor, I've got Director Wilson and Nicholson.
Mr. Chair, may we have a little bit of heat in here? We're freezing.
Yeah, we have
They must have that air conditioning cranked right down.
Is there somebody raising a point of privilege? Let's take 5 minutes and we'll, oh, wait a minute, we have it on the table right now? We have it on the table. Dealt with, thank you. So I've got alternate Director Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to make an alternate motion recommending.
There's already a motion on the floor, and I would ask that you hold your resolution until it looks like we've got a speakers list and some people would like to speak to the resolution on the floor, unless you insist on making an amending motion.
Well, I think I'd like to amend the motion then to make 90% to the electoral areas and 10% for asset management capacity building.
Is there a seconder for that? Everyone clear on what the amendment is? Any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? The amendment's defeated. Oh, yeah. All those opposed, raise your hands, please. Oh, yeah, this is easier the other way. Who are in favor? Alternate Director Tatum. Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the things that bothers me at the moment, this is no disrespect to the alternates who are here, is that there are 4 elected officials who are not here, and that's why the alternates are here. And I'm assuming that they've been fully briefed on what their immediate elected officials want as far as this is concerned. I would much rather have this put back until those 4 elected officials are here. Failing that, if that particular motion fails, I have another motion that I would like to make. I'm not happy with the split of 60, 30, 10. I have another split that I would like to recommend as well. But in the meantime, I think this should be put back until the 4 elected directors are present for these discussions. It's a very important one.
We have a motion to refer this to where and for what?
To where? To the next regional board meeting? Guide me here.
Well,
Don't just answer the
there's,
question you know
this
I
is
can't
an
answer.
electoral area issue.
All
It
right
can be
then.
referred back to the Electoral Area
Thank you very
Services
much. That's what
Committee.
I'm looking
It
for.
can be referred to the next board
Thank you.
meeting.
That's what I'll do.
So you're referring this to the next Electoral Area Services Committee.
When the others are present, yes.
Are you adding that to the referral motion? It completely changes the nature of the motion. If you refer it to the Electoral Area Services Committee, it goes to the next Electoral Area Services Committee. If you refer it when all the rest of the directors are present, we may never have the meeting or have the discussion.
All right. I think you're making things awfully complicated here, but let's refer it so that the majority of the 4 missing people are here as much as possible, rather than 4 alternates. How much more do you want me to explain it to you?
I'm turning to staff. Apparently, we have a timing issue around budget direction. Ms. Weiner? Hang on, before you jump in, was there a seconder for that referral motion? Duly moved and seconded. Ms. Weiner, would you please provide us some information as to budget timing?
I just wanted to advise the board that the budget package is getting ready to be distributed on July 8th. And that information for the distribution of the gas tax and community works funding, staff will be preparing the budgets, and we were planning on attaching that to it to help with the budget process, as the deadline date is August 16th to have the budgets in and completed.
Thank you. On the referral motion to the next Electoral Area Services Committee, call the question. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion's defeated. Do you want the in favors or the opposed? All those in favor of that last motion, the referral motion. Director Wilson, alternate Director Taylor. Okay. Back to the original motion. Any discussion? Oh, yes, Director Nicholson, you are next on the list, yes.
Well, I would like to amend the motion. I feel, I think asset management is important, but I also think that we would be smart if we put aside 10% of the Community Works funds for regional strategic initiative. And I'm thinking that there may be things that come out of our strategic planning that we might think about wanting to do as a region. And I think it might even be something that we would hope that the municipalities might contribute to doing as a regional project. So perhaps a community energy strategy, or, you know, there's lots of things that we could do that are outside of this asset management realm that I think are really important. So I don't want to close that door, so I would propose that we amend it so that it's 50% for the electoral areas, 30% for asset management, 10% for the asset management, what was it called? Capacity building, and then 10% for regional strategic initiative.
Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Director Staples. Discussion on the item. Director Sebring.
Just give me some context. I've missed something here. How much money are we actually talking about? Ballpark.
Mr. Takarik, please come to the lectern.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe it's, so the Community Works Fund 3.0, this third phase is about $10 million. So 10% would be about $1 million. Or is that right?
Over 5 years.
Over 5 years.
No, but to be clear, the total then is, like, we're splitting up how much at 60, 20, 10, 10.
So it's about, so it would be, or through you, Mr. Chair, it would be, so we're talking 50% to electoral area directors.
Yeah, 50% of what?
So of
What's
10 million.
Okay,
So 5 million.
that's the number I needed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Director Stone.
Just a question on process. Is this a weighted vote as it's financed at the board? Yeah, it is. Thank you.
So just to provide a bit of context, this is Community Works Funds 3.0. The last round, the allocation was 80% of the dollars were at the direction of the electoral area director, confirmed by a vote of the board. 10% was for strategic, broader picture initiatives, and 10% was for end of term, year 4 and 5 of the of that 2.0 program. Given the work that we've done on asset management and the key priorities that we have on our own infrastructure, staff brought forward a report that said that we have a list of priorities that need addressing, and they put forward an initial recommendation of, I believe it was 40% discretion of electoral area directors to be approved by the board, 40% asset management, and 20% for capacity building. That was modified when it came to the last electoral area directors meeting. And at that meeting, it was going to be, it was 50, 40, 10. So 50% at the discretion of the electoral areas directors approved by the board, 40% for asset management, and 10% for the capacity building. At electoral area services, after lengthy discussion, it was moved, seconded, and approved that the formula that you see before us today of 60% to be directed by the electoral area director approved by the board, 30% asset management, and 10% asset management capacity building. We discussed this. A number of directors inquired as to, had questions about it. I checked with Mr. Takarik yesterday. There have been no inquiries to his office. So this, the time between last Wednesday's electoral area directors meeting and today was the opportunity for people to make inquiries in regards to this. This was published at the, on the regular day of publishing the agenda last Friday, and now it's before us. So at this point, we have the original motion. The amendment motion of, so that's 50, 30, 10, and 10? And it was seconded? Any further discussion? Director Wilson.
I can't see that any further erosion of the amount that's coming to the electoral areas is going to do any good whatsoever, and I will not be supporting this. If it's passed, good luck to you all. But if it's not passed, I have another motion that I would like to bring forward, but I can't support a further erosion of the money that's coming to the electoral areas.
I've got Mr. Kieber next.
I just want to clarify something. The 30% that's going to asset management infrastructure is the infrastructure in the electoral areas. So that means at least 90% will be spent on the electoral areas. The capacity building is for regional impact.
Follow-up, Director Wilson?
Well, that makes things slightly clearer, but the latest motion that's on the floor, as far as I can make out, is 50%, not 60% as is written here. So it is an erosion, a reduction.
Alternate Director Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess just a question. Why can't these allocations be unique for each area? For example, why couldn't we have 90% where we are? After all, it is gas tax money coming back to the citizens and taxpayers in that region. Then if other areas want to go 100% one way or the other, they could, or whatever percentage they want.
Fair question. The board has ultimate responsibility for the how the Community Works funds are dispersed, and the board has chosen this path and is continuing along this path. Don't know that this is what's been recommended by staff. We've followed procedures in the past, and I don't see us going to 100% allocation to individual directors. So at this point, we have a motion on the floor. I've got Director Nicholson has spoken, so I'm going to go Toporowski, Tatum, and Nicholson. Director Toporowski.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted a clarification on that percentage again. Thank you.
Ms. Harrison?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The formula is now 50% electoral area, 30% asset management, 10% asset management capital,
Capacity building.
capacity building, and 10% regional strategic initiative.
Yes, that's a proposed amendment. Alternate Director Tatham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In regard to Director Nicholson's request for 10% to be allocated to strategic spending or initiatives, is there any other pot that handles that requirement?
Mr. Kieber.
In general government, which is regionally funded, there is strategic initiatives fund of, I believe, is at 75,000. And that's the only fund at this point. Yeah.
Follow up?
So when you say this, that's not really an initiative, it's more for identification and planning, is that correct? I mean, 75,000 is not going to do anything to buy anything, so I'm presuming that's just for doing some kind of analysis or study. Is that correct?
Mr. Kieber.
Mr. Chair, initially it was 150,000. This last budget, the board decreased it to 75. It's funding in general government for initiatives the board maybe want to look into. It may be planning, and maybe to fund NGOs, and maybe to do a number of different initiatives.
Thank you.
Director Nicholson.
Oh, I can't remember what I was going to say. I just would like to reiterate that I think that we're a regional board and we should be trying to think regionally about some of our issues. And asset management is really important, but it doesn't encompass new things that we might think are important to be proactive on as a result of our strategic planning. So I do think we need to have a 10% is not even very much money for that kind of thing, but it's better than nothing. And I think while I appreciate the allocation to my electoral area, I think 50% is sufficient to provide for quite a lot of flexibility in addressing community needs. So that's where I'm coming from.
Got Director Staples, followed by Wilson, and I'm on the list.
Just to speak to why I seconded the motion, part of it is thinking back to the strategic planning sessions that we've had and all of the conversations that we've started about initiatives, regional initiatives that are important to the board, and to only have $75,000 in a pot to go towards those initiatives. This seems like it would give us a lot of ability to pursue whatever it is that the board deems important for us to move forward around environmental issues, because there was a number of them that came up at that strategic planning session. And so I feel that this is a good opportunity for us to allocate some funds towards moving forward.
Thank you, Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I fully understand Director Nicholson's wish to go regional on this, and I'm not against that. I'm not in the process of declaring war against the regions. But here's my problem. We have a situation here where the regions get to vote on gas tax money which comes to us, and yet they get their own gas tax money, and we can't vote what they do with them. Okay, fair enough. Let's split this up and go regional on this. Are they going to reciprocate and give us some of theirs? I doubt it.
Mr. Kieber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So on that note, last gas tax term, we did put money aside for regional initiatives. Unfortunately, the member municipalities did not want to come to the board with their regional community works fund. However, nothing's stopping that from, it's a new board, a new day, going over the next term. Maybe there are going to be projects that municipalities might want to contribute from a regional perspective. This would just be putting funds aside for the CV, for electoral areas to have their funds set aside. If you wish, you could put it into this fund, and at year 4, if there's no other initiatives coming forward, you can have that in reserve, and then it would then be reallocated back to electoral areas based on whatever formula you want at that point in time. But it does put that aside for that option.
Got myself on the list, then I'll go to Director Sebring and Stone. When the last time I think I had a vote in this in regards to how the allocations were being made, it seemed to me that the board of the day, which I'm thinking was 2 terms ago, the resolution came forward from staff, and it was recommended that it be divided up 100% to electoral areas based on population. And I put up my hand, and a couple other directors agreed that we needed to think a little bit more regionally, and we needed to be prepared to not only participate in something that may be multi-electoral area, but we also needed to ensure that there was some dollars left in the years 4 and 5 of the program to perhaps a new board to be able to allocate some things for key priorities. And that actually ended up being very helpful for some projects towards the end of the term. As my electoral area has a fairly small allocation under this program, and I would like to be able to allocate every dollar that I possibly could to projects that were specifically within my electoral area. But when it comes to this source of funds, I'm actually going to fully support the amended resolution, because I think we need to look down the road, and we need to think about the future, and we need to think a little bit more regionally. I'll have about $250,000 to allocate over 4 years. It's not a lot of money, doesn't do a lot of capital works, but I think that's the best thing to do for my taxpayers and for the region. Director Sebring.
Thank you. I'm glad I asked the question early on about how much money we're talking about. I mean, 10% is still $1 million, which we want to put into the strat plan, if that's what I'm hearing, will be the result of this. And I acknowledge that building a strategic plan without actually funding it is problematic. I mean, what's the point of having a plan if you get no money for it? But this seems a little bit high for me, given the asset management challenges that are facing us in a whole bunch of areas. I like what's being proposed here in principle, but I don't like the way it splits out. I mean, this brings the electoral area under points 1 and 2 with the amendment, brings them down to 80%, which still seems high. But given those challenges, if it was a 5% shift, I might be able to support it. But this is a little too much, a little too rich for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Stone.
I'm not going to open the whole can of worms around funding allocations brought up by Director Wilson, but I will say last year, or this budget year, when the federal government doubled our 1-year gas tax allocations to the municipalities, we allocated all of that additional funding to improving the water delivery system to the Diamond, which is in Area H. $436,000 of our $975,000 budget was allocated to pumping system and generator to ensure that what happened in the windstorm when we almost lost the ability to deliver water went out. So, I think that there's not going to even talk about the funding inequities in recreation North Cowichan, but I think that there are a lot of things that we can do to become more cooperative regionally. So I wouldn't assume, as was said by Mr. Kieber, I think, that the municipalities aren't every day trying to help support everybody in the region. I'm not, I wasn't expecting Director Nicholson's motion, and I appreciate the thought behind it, and I think there's good reasoning behind it. I'm not so sure that I would think that the number's too high, as Director Sebring had said. What I was trying to signal to you was I was going to say you should support this. But, so I'll make that plea now to North Cowichan, who, in a lot of ways, if you want to look at a regional initiatives, North Cowichan and Duncan put a lot of their municipal tax money into benefits for everybody in this region. And I don't think that if we really wanted to get into counting pennies and tallying up who does what for who, that it would take us a long time to, all of us, including the outlying municipalities, to make up for the investments that North Cowichan and Duncan have made to serve everybody in the region.
And just before I go to Director Salmon, who hasn't spoken yet, all allocation and spending around capital projects and the likes will come back to this board for ultimate approval anyways, as I understand it, correct?
As part of the 5-year financial plan, yes.
Right. Yes, Director Stone.
So that means that if there was this million set aside for regional initiatives and better analysis was done in the budgeting process and we realized that more money should go into asset management, the board could redirect those funds back to that initiative.
On an
Okay,
annual
thank you.
basis, yes. Director Salmon.
Yeah, thank you. I think $1 million is too much to allocate just without knowing a lot more detail on what exactly it would be for. So I won't be supporting this. You know, we discussed, it was thoroughly discussed at ESC, and we came up with 60-30-10 for important work. I think we should stick with that. Thank you.
Alternate Director Tatum, to close.
I agree with Director Salmon on this. I think $1 million is too much, especially related to a $75,000 strategic budget that we have currently. And the fact that this is going to be contributed by the electoral areas based upon their allocations. And so it means, you know, I guess us in Area I, which I think has the smallest amount, under $200,000, will be if that were the case, we would contribute a lot less than Shawnigan Lake or Mill Bay. So I think it's, you know, we, as Director Salmon has said, we sort of flogged this horse repeatedly last week, and we finally decided on a formula that nobody was really ecstatic about, but at least it just solved the problem, and I think that we should go with the original motion as it was presented. Thank you.
Okay, this is the path forward that I'm going to recommend, and I'm hoping I'm going to get lots of nodding up and down, and I'm going to call the question on the amended resolution. And depending on the results of that, I think we've thrashed this around to a fairly large extent. I would like to go directly to the original resolution if we don't amend it. Is everyone clear on that? So the amended resolution is on the floor. I know, the main one's still there. So if the amendment fails, I'm going to go right next to calling the question on the main motion. So on the amendment, which is 50, 30, 10, and 10, all those in favor? And this is weighted, so what do we got here? Okay, those opposed? Keep them up. We have to tabulate the vote. Keep your hands up. Yeah, but you're not official, she's official. The amendment's defeated. I'm going to go directly to the main motion. The main motion is 60-30-10. All those in favor? I think we're going to count the opposed. All those opposed? The motion carries. 10-minute break?
Oh,
wasn't that it?
No?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, can we finish?
Yeah,
No.
I'm
Can I-
hearing calls for break, so let's,
Can I finish this and then break? Oh, they want to break.
10-minute break. Terry, ready?
Yeah, yeah.
We're back to order. Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is for electoral area directors only, and it's 14 to 23. 14, that the community engagement be undertaken with electoral area residents to obtain public input on the draft harmonized official community plan. That the draft harmonized official community plan be referred to the electoral area advisory planning commissions for comment on general consistency with electoral area official community plans with the referral period commencing September 2019. 15, the development variance permit, DVP 19B02 Dandelion Lane to vary electoral area B Shawnigan Lake zoning bylaw 980 to reduce the front parcel line setback for a newly constructed residence from 7.5 meters to 8.5 meters be approved.
5.8 meters.
16, the development variance permit application Marble Bay Road to vary section 5.15 of zoning bylaw 2465 to reduce the interior side parcel line setback for a newly constructed residence from 3.0 meters to 2.84 meters and 2.77 meters be approved. 17, the development permit variance application 5355 Miller Road be approved by varying electoral area E, Cowichan Station, Satlam, Glenora zoning bylaw number 1840, section 5.2 to increase the maximum size of an accessory building from 100 meter to 189 meter. That, 2, the demolition permit application for the existing non-compliant accessory building be submitted at the same time as the building permit application for the new accessory building. And 3, that the existing non-compliant accessory building be completely removed from the property within 18 months of the date of issuance of the building permit for the new accessory building. 18, the development variance permit application for 625 Sentinel Drive be varied section 10.9 zoning bylaw 3520 to reduce the minimum setback requirement for an exterior side parcel line from 4.5 meters to 1.5 meters for the development of an accessory building be denied. 19, the development permit for variance of 3966 Cobble Hill Road to vary 5.4 of the South Cowichan zoning bylaw number 3520 to decrease the setback from a watercourse from 15 meters to 10 meters for the construction of three additions to an existing single residential dwelling be approved. 2, that the general manager of land services be authorized to permit minor revisions to development permit with variance in accordance to the intent of the development permit guidelines of South Cowichan Community Plan bylaw number 3510. 20, the development permit with variance number DP 1903 to authorize a single-family dwelling and to vary section 5.6 of the zoning bylaw number 2465 to increase the permitted height for a principal building from 10 meters to 12.21 meters be approved. And 21, that the agricultural land reserve exclusion application number ALR 18E02 4005 Row Road be denied, that an amendment bylaw be prepared to rezone the industrial portion of the 4005 Row Road to agricultural residential, and to allow the subdivision potential along the boundary of the agricultural land reserve. Number 22, the second dwelling reduction covenant CA 38194117 registered under 1177 Fair Tide Road be discharged. 23, that an amendment of South Cowichan Official Community Plan Bylaw number 3510 for an application RZ19A01 Malahat Skywalk be forwarded to the board for consideration for first and second reading. 2, that an amendment of the South Cowichan Bylaw number 3520 for the application number RZ19A01 Malahat Skywalk be forwarded to the board for consideration of first and second reading. 3, that the application of RZ19A01 Malahat Skywalk not proceed to public hearing on the official community plan and zoning amendment until the Electoral Area Services Committee reviews and recommends to the board a long-term tenure in favor of the Cowichan Valley Regional District for ongoing community trail access to McCurdy Point Park, and that prior to the adoption of the bylaws, the tenure be executed. 4, the trail access and related features, including a public parking area, be provided by the applicant that are constructed to the Cowichan Valley Regional District Parks and Trails Division's standards prior to the opening of the Malahat Skywalk for customers. 5, the referrals to BC Transit, Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, First Nations Governments, Island Health, Malahat Volunteer Fire Department, Ministry of Forest, Lands and Natural Resource Operations, RCMP, City of Duncan, Capital Regional District be accepted for the application number RZ19A01, Malahat Skywalk.
Moving those items.
Moving those items.
Do we have a seconder? Seconded by Director Salmon. Any discussion on those items? Alternate Director Taylor.
Mr. Chair, just a question on 19, moving the setback from water course from 15 meters to 10 meters. Is there any risk of flooding with that one?
We had a very long discussion
Yeah,
of this in
this was
Electoral Area Services.
lengthy discussion, and I believe there was a riparian plan on stream side protection and enhancement area provided with this, so.
With the documents.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On number 23, in particular, numbers 4 and 5, I know we had long discussions on this and all the rest of it, but, you know, you read through this, these are very reputable people. They run businesses and they've built things all over the place, and yet by putting these two in here, if I recall the conversations that went on last time, we're almost saying, well, you know, you said you're going to do it, but we don't really trust you, so we'd like a covenant in there, please. Sorry, numbers 3 and 4. And, you know, there has to be a time when this board becomes a little bit more business friendly and starts believing what certain developers are going to tell you. These guys are not going to back away from their thing. What this is going to do, and I'll tell you right now, is delay the start of this building. They will not be allowed, they will not be able probably to start building in September, and that's going to be a big loss to this whole community because of some of the statements that were said to the people that came here. And I'm going to obviously try and move this forward as quickly as I can, but I'm not happy with some of the things that were said to those developers. It's almost like, yeah, okay, we don't really believe you. Want to come in and thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other hands, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed?
That
The
is my
motion
report,
carries.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Director Yanni DiNardo. To item C3, and that is the Ms. Harrison. CR3, pardon me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item CR3 is report and recommendations of the Director Services Select Committee meeting of April 18th.
Director McGonigal, I believe, is the vice for there.
Thank you. As Director Acton is not here, report and recommendations of the Director Services Select Committee of April 18th with recommendation 1, that the amended draft code of conduct attached to the April 10th, 2019 Human Resources Division staff report be approved, and 2, that a consultant be engaged to assist with a compensation review for the directors. Those, I would move those.
seconded by Director Stone. Director Sebring.
Just as a point of process, and I'm not going to hang my hat on it, I'll vote in favor of this, but it would be nice if we had the attached amended draft code of conduct attached to this agenda. I didn't go back through and dig through it and see exactly what it is we're voting on. I'm just wondering why we can't do that if it's on this agenda, rather than just make a reference to a previous.
Have staff make a note of that, please.
Thank you.
Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, as I recall, that code of conduct is pretty comprehensive and pretty long. And one of the comments that I've heard, well, we might just well have a lawyer in our back pockets to be able to actually get on with anything. There is a need for a code of conduct, but I think we should agree that we're at least all grown-ups here and should know how to behave without a Bible in our back pockets or a lawyer in our back pockets as well. I will be supporting this reluctantly. The second point is about the consultant. I want to be perfectly clear about this as far as director's salaries are concerned. I am not opposed to fair pay for any job. And I will be attending the next select committee meeting on the 10th of July. I asked when it was going to be. I'm looking forward to that, actually, because I want to comment fully on some of the dialogue that's been put out about director compensation and the kind of figures that have been thrown around. Those figures have not been made public, and I don't intend to do it here. But I'm going to ask the question of the consultant to assist. Now, what's the consultant going to assist with? What's he going to do? Look at other jurisdictions, say, well, you know, they get that much, you should get that much. That's what's going to happen right here. You start into a war like that where they get because you should get, you're going to go round and round in circles where every other place is going to say the same thing. I'm really looking forward to attending that next select committee meeting, but I'm reluctantly supporting this right now.
Thank you very much. Director Tatham.
Yes, there's kind of two parts to this CR3, and I wondered why they're lumped together.
They were recommended by the committee to the board.
Okay, so if I can follow up here, the board, regarding the code of conduct, I've got some, I'm wondering why that was done. Was there instances that required it? What do other jurisdictions do in this regard? And so I'll leave it at those two questions. And I'm not sure who I asked that of.
Well, I'll take the first one. The board directed the select committee to come up with the code of conduct. The select committee met, discussed various codes of conduct from different jurisdictions, based a lot on North Cowichan, and the document that was produced was recommended to the board by the select committee that was tasked to do that. Director McGonigal.
And I believe various other municipalities do also include a code of conduct within their elected officials' packages. For instance, the town of Lake Cowichan implemented a code of conduct, which is also a part of your swearing-in ceremonies. So it's a public document. While you're being sworn in, you're also adhering to the code of conduct that the town of Lake Cowichan has adopted. So other municipalities throughout the province are looking at just codes of conduct to adhere to how people interact. And I understand that we are adults, but sometimes we have to be reminded of what that conduct should be like.
Director Sebring.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, North Cowichan did a code of conduct at the end of the last term based on some issues we had at that table. This has been a big issue province-wide. I don't know that it's been a big issue here at this table specifically, but given some of the things that are going on, like UBCM has done a full report on how to put these kinds of codes of conduct together. Everybody that studied this agrees that the biggest problem with this whole paradigm is that there's very little in terms of enforcement. Even if you violate the code of conduct, all we can essentially do is rap you on the knuckles and say, well, you're off committees, and maybe we'll take away your travel privileges. But you know, you can't kick somebody off the board or off council because of it. That's sort of the next piece. But some of the egregious behavior that I have personally witnessed and that and not at this table, to be clear, and that has been demonstrated to be happening around the province, I think demonstrates the need for this kind of code of conduct. We are in a political paradigm where things are getting more heated and more divided and more partisan, and that's starting to translate into local governance, and we need to do everything we can not to have that happen so that we can govern as adults and govern collegially. And I think this, as much as anything, would be a preventative measure to make sure we don't degenerate into that kind of nonsense, rather than a punitive measure that says, oh, we have a problem and we need to deal with it. I appreciate the fact that this has come forward sort of proactively, so that we have a tool to deal with stuff if it ever comes up. But trust me, you don't want to wait until it comes up and then have to deal with it. I've been there. It's not fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Sebring. Director Stone?
Sorry, I was basically the same thing, as well as Minister Robinson's welcome letter to new elected officials recommended that you adopt a code of conduct, and she even provided a sample code of conduct. And it was a UBCM recommendation as well, based on some of the issues in the previous term around the province and at conferences. So those are all spoken to in the code of conduct.
Alternate Director Taylor to close.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I'd like to address the consultant regarding the compensation review for directors. Is there any direction there that any increases recommended would not take place until after the next election of directors?
There's no recommendation there because the board makes a decision.
Okay. I'd like to leave that with the board to think about. The other things I would like to wonder about, there's no details here about what the consultant would do. And picking up on what Director Wilson said, if the pool of analysis for the consultant is strictly other boards like this, then there's something called a ratchet effect that takes place. The first one that goes high just sets the stage for other ones to go high afterwards. Perhaps we need to have some investigation looking at what happens in the private sector. And the final thing I would like to make as a point is that I think a lot of people around this table do this as a point of volunteerism, and that really compensation is perhaps the least significant thing on their minds when they go forward with this. And I know all the other boards I've sat on over the years, I've always volunteered. Occasionally been happy to get expenses when I traveled, but often donated that amount too. So I think those are the kind of things, before this goes any further, it just says a consultant be engaged. I think we should be looking at the details of who the consultant is and what exactly the consultant is going to be looking at. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? One opposed. Motion carries. Alternate Director Taylor. Item CR4 has been distributed. Ms. Harrison?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a recommendation from Regional Services Committee.
I did not get the
Point of order,
distribution.
Mr. Chair, I didn't get the distribution either.
Right. So I think we have Mr. Chair, we have a mix-up.
I think we
because
have a mix-up.
we just said Regional Services Committee, but the agenda says
Community Services, sorry, and it does say on there Regional Services, so I.
Mine will not
turn
be
to
coming forward till the
Director
next meeting.
McGonigal, the chair of, or for the purposes of that meeting, Director McGonigal, Community Services.
I believe that will be coming forward to the next meeting.
No, that,
I
we should
do
have a
not
hard
have,
copy.
I do not have a hard copy. I have regional services.
Okay, hang on, we're getting it straightened out here.
Because, yes.
Okay,
So clarification on the confusion.
Yes.
Is clear as,
this is Regional Services.
you got
not
me?
community.
I'm sure glad you can chair a meeting, Director Stone.
Director Stone.
Reports and recommendations from the Regional Services Committee. Your Regional Services Committee reports and recommends as follows, that the regional grant and aid budget for 2020 be reduced to 0.
Director Yanni DiNardo, seconding the motion. Any discussion on this? Director McGonigal?
I understand the intent of the motion and the difficulty in the process of regional grant and aids. But I also understand the excellent work that some of these groups do provide, NGOs, other organizations. I look at this as perhaps a pause instead of negating the regional grant and aids. It was a problematic process with no disrespect to anyone, but we all champion the ones that we embrace, looking at the policy that was currently in place. I would hope looking forward that we can come to a different decision, perhaps a sub-regional grant and aid process that may be an option. I unfortunately will not be able to support this.
Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We do contribute a lot to a lot of organizations. We've now actually added two more with the watershed and also the affordable housing. We as directors as well have a grant and aid that we give out on an annual basis. And I know that the municipalities also do that. And we have had such a challenge with this. We've had people that have filled out forms and then it hasn't worked out for them. It's very confrontational. It doesn't really work. We've had grant and aid committees and that hasn't really worked. And I really feel that there is an adjustment that we can make here, and part of it would be as directors, maybe possibly doing a different way with their grant and aid. But I think that we here at CVRD and as a whole contribute a lot to the community, and continue to and will continue to with our grants and aids as directors. So I don't think it's taking away that much from the community. Thank you.
Thank you, and I've got a bit of a speakers list here. There's a number of directors approached me after the meeting and felt that some more discussion would be appropriate, so I'd be more than willing to add names to the list. I've got Director Staples and Sebring next. Director Staples.
I won't be able to support this motion either. I feel that I agree that the process was far below excellent and could use a lot of work. But I don't want to throw this out because of the process, particularly with a new board doing budget right after an election. I don't feel that that's a good reason to go down this road. And there has to be a way that we can do this effectively. I know that a lot of the organizations that do apply for these, they rely on them more to obtain other grants. They have to have that investment from this level of government or some municipal level of government. And some of them, well, we as municipal governments also do have grants and aids. Some of them don't fall within our jurisdiction, and they may not fall in North Cowichan's or Ladysmith's or an electoral area, depending on the type of organization. So I just feel like we're kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, doing it this way. And I'd like to see this be revisited. I was hoping we could do it during strategic planning session. We had talked about that at the board table when we were doing this to begin with, that we needed to find another way. But I don't feel that this is it.
Thank you. Director Sebring.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, this is a one-line recommendation that that folks who might be in the gallery or who might be watching online don't have any context. It just says that the regional grant and aid budget for 2020 be reduced to zero. Just for context, so that we understand, so we all understand what we're talking about, I'm going to ask staff, and I'm not sure whether that's Mr. Kieber or the finance folks, how much was that money now? Is that just a net cut in requisition, or is there some kind of strategy in place to say we're going to take that money, however much it was, and find another way to allocate it, give it to the electoral area directors so that it's a different process? To just say regional grant and aid budget for 2020 be reduced to zero without providing the public a little bit of background and context as to what it is we're talking about here and what its impacts will be and what the alternatives will be, I don't think is politically wise, to say the least. Can we have a bit of that context?
Mr. Kieber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is a recommendation from this morning's committee that had a whole report on it. So there were a number of pages that explained, that gave various options, and this is the option that the committee chose. A little bit of history is, I've been here for a while now, and this program has gone all over the map. It started off below $15,000. It went up to 30. I think when the Nate Games came, it went up to high as 250 per year for a 2-year period to get $500,000. A number of years ago, the board went up to $300,000, and it's been there for a number of years. It's since been reduced to 150. I think it was in 2018, pardon me. 2019 has since reduced it to 75,000, and this proposal is basically saying we want to go from 75,000 down to 0. The logic was there's a number, we have over $1 million in functions that give out grant funding already. Cowichan Housing Association is, as an example, is one of those. Actually, it was over $1 million even before we started giving that money out. The individual electoral area directors also have a grant need function. They give funding out, and the member municipalities. So the report talks about all those. At the end of the day, it sounded like the committee had gone with the resolution to decrease it to 0.
I appreciate that, and I read the report. Not everybody who watches this will watch that committee meeting. It's just good to have that background. So we're talking about 75,000 to be eliminated from the budget, so it's a net requisition decrease at the end of the day, unless the board gives other direction to say, well, we're going to take that 75 grand and do something else with it.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Kieber.
Or the individual electoral area directors decide to increase their contribution based on their normal share.
Fair game. Thank you.
Not sure that that's an actual linkage, but fair enough. I've got a speakers list. I've got Director Stone next.
And yeah, for those that may be curious, there is a report from this morning's Regional Services Committee. When we went into it, we've been told for a couple of years, and this year's process was no better or worse than every single year I've been involved in. So this isn't a new issue, and it's been getting decreased each year because it's always been an issue. One of the issues is there's no function for it to be requisitioning taxes regionally for this function. So it's been done through, off the side of a desk through general government, which really isn't appropriate. And if we do want a regional grant and aid function, we should be going to the electorate to get approval for that function and tax for it appropriately. The process speaks to the issues with the applications in my mind when I review the applications every year. And this is why we end up in these processes. Everybody has their own lens at which they determine what's regional and what's not. We get, the majority of applications we get every year are not considered, you could not consider them regional. If the resolution is passed, that money gets returned to, hopefully not return to reducing requisition, but we'll see what comes forward in the budget, but will be returned to the general government function, and those funds can be used or the requisition can be reduced appropriately. The budget has gone down. I thought when I first got here, I couldn't believe it, the amount of money that was being taxed every year for that function, especially since, according to the Local Government Act, there wasn't actually a function in place that authorized the taxation for that regional grant and aid. Through the reduction of that amount, any amount that is reduced, the municipalities, we can look into last year's budget and say that 75,000 cost Town of Ladysmith $9,000 in requisition. If we want to up our municipal grant and aid by $9,000 to compensate, that's a decision we can make. If the regional organizations, or which most of them are, the sub-regional organizations, want to approach the individual electoral areas and the municipalities in which they provide service, I'm sure that we would be more than willing to look at their application in the context of the many that we have. I think this year we had over 400,000 in applications for $75,000 in funding. I don't know how that provides any kind of certainty to an organization who becomes to rely on that funding, knowing full well that the majority of applications that come forward are not going to be able to be funded in any reasonable amount that makes their goals achievable and creates the accountability. There was applications there that would have eaten up the budget in one grant. And if you can't give them the full grant, how can you give them accountability to deliver on what they said they're going to do in the grant application when you can only give them 5 or 10% of their request? So I just think it's problematic in the sense of, we hear Director Taylor talk about, well, what about Saltaire all the time? How are we going to come to the table and say that one region, you know, the Thetis Island application came forward this year and we gave them $5,000 out of a $50,000 ask, I think it was. I just think it's problematic at the best scenario, and we definitely don't have the best case scenario here. I would suggest that if strategically the board wants to continue with grant and aid during this term, that it become a strategic item and we go to the electorate for approval to do that requisition for a regional grant and aid before we continue to spend money they've never actually given us approval for.
Thank you. Alternate Director Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I find much of what Director Stone said that I can agree with wholeheartedly. And I guess when I look at this, it is so complex. We have so many grants coming in. How do we ever allocate those? How do we choose the best ones? Furthermore, I look at it personally and I say, here we are in leadership positions. Why aren't we within our communities setting the groundwork within our community when we hear of a need within the community for some organization, that we step up first individually to put some money into things? And that's what I've done in my community. And in fact, Director Stone should be happy to know that I have 2 of those Ladysmith buttons on my desk now. I think there might be a prize involved, but at least, you know, I've been thinking of Ladysmith. So I think that's the way it should be. As you know, there is still the local area activity allocations if they want to go ahead with that, if they do. But I think we should step away as a regional board here. So I support the motion for 0. Thank you.
Director Nicholson.
I think I've almost given up on this one. But I have to say that I really believe that our community is as great as it is because of all the people out in our community who volunteer their time and provide great services, and services that we certainly could never possibly imagine being able to provide as a local government. And so investing in those groups is a very inexpensive way of supporting the community. It really stretches the dollar. And from my perspective, it's very important that we do it in a fair and transparent way. So while while Director Stone indicated that it hasn't improved, I think at least this year there was a call, and there were clear criteria, and people had everyone was able to apply fairly. It really bothered me when I first started here that it was just, if you had heard about it, you could slip in an application and maybe be lucky. So, I think that we could do a better job. I'm sure we could make it work if we wanted to, but it really requires people to think regionally. And that, I think, is the biggest challenge on this program. So, I think it speaks to the board more than it does to the process or anything else at this point.
Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, as most people know around this table, I'm not a socialist, but I certainly have a very, very strong social conscience. And my wife and I and my family do a lot to help those in need. Having said that, I have to agree with what Director Stone said. This doesn't work. The last allocation talks, I wasn't here for that, but I certainly heard about it and I watched it on thing, were basically a fiasco. It wasn't, and that kind of thing can't happen on. I think earlier on there was perhaps an allusion that I'm not very bright as far as process is concerned, and that's probably true. So I'm going to ask for a little bit of clarification here. How is it possible that a vote can come to this table and be approved and then be brought back again afterwards? This is shades of Brexit. Look, if you're going to make a motion and you approve it, let it stand. Why is it back again here?
I think that's a question for Ms. Harrison. Mr. Kieber.
I'll answer that. The previous committee, Regional Services, reviewed this report and made a recommendation to the board. This is now the board sitting to review that recommendation.
So I'm last on the list. I just want to note that this has been probably the most challenging file in the 10 years that I've been here. I will note that there have been some incredible investments in some really worthy groups that have made Cowichan proud. I'll also note that that this table has had some challenges in allocating dollars in a perhaps an appropriate fashion. I know that I've spent full days here on one topic, and that's the regional grant and aid. And there's been successes and there's been failures. There's been attempts to modify the process by which we allocate these funds. And I guess the one thing that I'm fairly certain of is that if we reduce this to zero, it won't be a pause. It'll be next to a permanent removal from our budget, because we've already reduced by 600,000 the regional parkland acquisition, which will be a significant tax increase if we restore it to its previous levels. And I would suggest that that is unlikely to happen. But in this case, yes, we can transfer some of the responsibilities of supporting some of these initiatives and grants to local electoral area directors' grant and aid budgets for those that have them. Not all directors have them. And, but I don't think we'll be reestablishing a new regional grant and aid function, which I think is kind of a sad day. So with that, we're all clear on what the resolution is, that the grant and aid budget be reduced to zero. Can we proceed? All those in favor? Do you want the in favor or the opposed? Those opposed? And I think I can say the motion carries. Next
That
item.
concludes my report.
You get the easy ones. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item on the agenda is staff reports. Item SR1 is a staff report from the Development Services Division regarding a condition of rezoning for application number RZ18C02 for 3625 Cobble Hill Road. And there is a recommendation. And the recommendation is that as a condition of rezoning application number RZ18C02 for 3625 Cobble Hill Road, a covenant for the amenity contribution for the construction of a trail in the Pine Street right-of-way be registered prior to consideration of adoption of South Cowichan OCP Amendment Bylaw 4258 and zoning amendment bylaw number 4259.
Look to the director for the area. Move the recommendation, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any discussion on this item? Director Wilson.
This is one of the better applications for development here. Gordon Smith, the applicant, has put in a huge amount, and I mean immense amount, of financial aid to various charitable organisations in the Cowichan Valley. He has gone above and beyond on this one, and I'm a little bit confused again by the imposition of a covenant, because the Parks Commission, when we met, looked at this path and said, yeah, okay, well, perhaps we don't want one there because we don't want to send people down a very, very steep path right onto Cobble Hill Road, which is one of the busiest in the thing. And we said, but if there's one there, Gordon Smith said, I will put it in, I will pay for it, I will do everything and he's gone above and beyond. And here we've got it again. We want a covenant, we don't believe you. He's going to do it. What is all this? Why are you asking people to do things they know, you know they're going to do I will support this, obviously, but I'm just mystified as to some of the things that go on here.
Director Stone.
I so much appreciate your faith in the goodwill of humanity. But I will say, based on some experience, that we've had covenants registered, then the developer doesn't follow through, and we've actually had to enforce the covenant to get that done. So all good intentions aside, things can change. After the development's approved, the developer can actually sell the property to somebody else, and they can say, oh, I never agreed to put that trail in. So covenants are an important part of it. Most often, those are discharged when the works are complete. It is a small extra step, but having seen when covenants aren't registered, things not get done, and even when covenants are registered, things not get done. It's just good practice and responsibility by the local government to ensure that those provisions are made. So I was going to say this earlier, but the second time, although I was like, oh, well, he's going to support this, but then you did make the comment about the covenant again. But it is an important piece just to make sure that whatever is committed to is fulfilled. Should they decide not to move forward, we've got a development in our community right now that a path was part of that. We registered the covenant, the new owner bought it, and we do have that assurance that it'll be done as part of that work, so.
Director Sebring.
Very much what Mayor Stone said. In my 10 years at the table of my municipality, I've seen a situation like this where the proponent died and the property was sold, and the new owner, you said earlier you're not a socialist. I'm assuming you're a Ronald Reagan fan. Remember the words, trust but verify. That's what this does.
Director Wilson.
Yeah, I agree. But in this particular case, I agree. I agree. There are certain people I wouldn't trust as far as I could throw them. Unless you know Gordon Smith, which you obviously don't, and you don't know the application that's going through. Honestly, no, I'm just making a point here. Yes, by all means, put the covenant on, but let's not do it every time.
Just a quick note, and I'll call the question. One of the very first lessons I learned at Electoral Area Services is that we zone and we regulate land, not people, when it comes to these items. So that's there. So I will now call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? See none opposed, that motion carries. Next item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next item is SR2, which is a report from the Chief Administrative Officer regarding the 2018 annual report. And the recommendation before you is that the 2018 annual report be received.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed, that motion carries. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We move on to public hearings. Item PH1, public hearing minutes and exhibits regarding CVRD bylaw number 4258 for electoral areas A, B, and C, South Cowichan official community plan amendment bylaw for 3625 Cobble Hill Road, 2019. And CVRD bylaw number 4259, electoral areas A and C, South Cowichan zoning amendment bylaw for 3625 Cobble Hill Road, 2019. And the recommendation before you is that public hearing minutes and exhibits regarding CVRD bylaw number 4258, electoral areas A, B, and C, South Cowichan OCP amendment bylaw, 2019 for 3625 Cobble Hill Road, and CVRD bylaw number 4259, electoral areas A and C, South Cowichan zoning amendment bylaw for 3625 Cobble Hill Road, 2019 be received.
Turn to Director Wilson. Moved, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. PH2, Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. PH2 are the public hearing minutes and report for CVRD bylaw 4271 and OCP amendment bylaw 4283. And the recommendation before you is that public hearing minutes regarding CVRD bylaw number 4271, electoral area D, Couch and Bay, official community plan amendment bylaw 4831, Trans-Canada Highway, 2019, and CVRD bylaw number 4272, electoral area D, Couch and Bay, upland zoning amendment bylaw for 4831, Trans-Canada Highway, 2019, be received.
Director Yanni DiNardo moves, seconded by Director Staples. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? Seeing none opposed, that motion carries. Next item, Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item are the bylaws, and we have no whole board bylaws, but we do have some bylaws for electoral area directors only. So moving to the first item, BEA 1, the recommendation is that CVRD bylaw number 4258, electoral areas A, B, and C, South Cowichan official community plan amendment bylaw for 3625 Cobble Hill Road, 2019, be granted third reading.
Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Salmon. Any discussion? Seeing none, electoral area directors only. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. That motion carries. BEA 2.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That CVRD bylaw number 4259, electoral areas A and C, South Cowichan zoning amendment bylaw for 3625 Cobble Hill Road, 2019, be granted third reading.
Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Marcotte. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? There's none opposed, the motion carries. BEA 3.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are two recommendations with this item. Number one, that CVRD bylaw number 4271, electoral area D, Cowichan Bay, official community plan amendment bylaw for 4831 Trans-Canada Highway, 2019, be granted third reading.
Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Nicholson. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? There's none opposed, that motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Number two, that CVRD bylaw number 4271, electoral area D, Cowichan Bay, official community plan amendment bylaw for 4831 Trans-Canada Highway, 2019, be adopted.
Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Alternate Director Tatum. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Those opposed? There's none opposed, the motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item BEA 4 has two recommendations. Number one, that CVRD bylaw number 4272, electoral area D, Cowichan Bay upland zoning amendment bylaw for 4831 Trans-Canada Highway, 2019, be granted third reading.
Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Wilson. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Those opposed? None opposed, the motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And number two, that CVRD bylaw number 4272, electoral area D, Cowichan Bay upland zoning amendment bylaw for 4831 Trans-Canada Highway, 2019, be adopted.
Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Alternate Director Goddard. Any discussion? All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion carries. I think that brings us down to question period, does it not?
It does not, Mr. Chair.
Oh, we have new business.
We have one remaining new business item.
Yes. That was,
That was the director's report.
oh, yes.
I don't have it, so.
I don't know if that has been sent to all the directors. This is what was provided to me. Do we need to perhaps take a copy of that and distribute it to the directors? Guess we gotta take 5 minutes. My apologies. New business item. New business item provided.
Ian? Just if anyone's heading down south on the. Yeah, it's close. Yeah. Road clear between Coxsackie and. Well, it's on its first and second. I don't know where Wilmot is.
Yeah. Where's that accident located?
Coxsackie Road area. On the highway. Oh, there's Wilmot.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? There is a chart that tells you do this, do that, do the other. Can we have directors back to the table, please? Alternate Director Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You have before you a recommendation that the CVRD approve CVRD insurance coverage for the Saltaire Family Fun Day, 18th of August, to be held in the CVRD Centennial Park, Saltaire, as a CVRD event. And the pertinent aspect there is Lynn Smith, the area director, will be supervising this event and acting on behalf of the CVRD. Within the Saltaire, we have a long history of Easter event and also a Halloween event. We have a group of volunteers that, you know, help organize the activities. And this would be a summertime one instead. And it's the idea of a sort of a family get-together, an opportunity for families within the community to get together for an old-fashioned type of summer picnic and fun day. Thank you.
I just need some clarification. Yeah, I heard you read out what sounded like a motion and then you continued on. So were you actually making a motion?
Oh, well, thank you, Mr. Chair, to clarify, yes. I'll read the motion again. Recommend that the CVRD approve CVRD insurance coverage for the Saltaire Family Fun Day, 18th of August, 2019, to be held in the CVRD Centennial Park and Saltaire as a CVRD event. And then supporting that is the fact that the...
Hang on, stop there. Is there a seconder? It's been seconded. I think first I'm going to go to our MIA contact on staff, Ms. Soldera. I gather you've been in contact with Director Smith. Can you provide us some background as to the circumstances around this, please?
So with respect to this event, the insurance coverage, liability coverage through the Municipal Insurance Association for the CVRD covers CVRD events. To qualify as a CVRD event, the event must be essentially controlled by the CVRD. The CVRD has to be the decision maker with respect to the event. They would make decisions about whether the event proceeds or is canceled, where it takes place, what activities are involved. that sort of thing. So that would typically involve staff, and we do have a process when third parties want to organize an event in our park. There's a process through our Parks Department where people are asked to provide liability coverage, naming this Cowichan Valley Regional District as an additional insured. In order for this, the recommendation as it's stated could not actually take place in that we can't add a specific event to our insurance policy. Should the board wish to provide insurance coverage for this event, it would be through calling the event a CVRD event and appointing staff or a director to be solely responsible for that event on behalf of the CVRD. That's the only way that our coverage can apply. The Municipal Insurance Association does offer some reasonably priced insurance for third-party organizations who would like to obtain liability insurance just for a particular event, and that option was provided to Director Smith as well.
I had Director Stone and Director Sebring, and I think I'll put myself on the list as well.
Sorry, and thanks for the clarification, because I wasn't sure if there was differences between municipalities, but based on how this is written, I don't think it's actually possible. Unless there's a big change to the event. That's why community groups like our Ladysmith Days is Ladysmith Celebration Society. It's completely arm's length from the town, and then they can pay to be on our rider. So it's a liability thing with MIA. If we take on an event, we usually have to have our Parks and Rec staff actually man the stations and things like that. There's a much higher bar for a municipal or it sounds like as well, for a regional district event. All of the people basically have to be, I think the term was something like the care and control of staff members. Elected officials cannot act as staff members because they're not staff members. So as much as I'm full 110% support from this, I would suggest going to somebody like the society that runs the community center and ask them to put on this event. They can add the $200 of insurance and off you go. This is why we need to have good relationships with our community groups, because they are the ones that can get that access to that insurance. I think that I would put through to staff, but if somebody like the Saltaire Society that runs the community center were to come forward with this event and ask for that rider, that would be available to them, would it not? Okay, thank you. It's just that I don't think it's actually possible the way that this is put together. Or a resolution from the board to fund staff to be there, and it would be a significant number of staff, I would believe.
Thank you, Director Stone. Director Sebring?
I'm just wondering, the memo from Director Smith makes reference to the Halloween events and the Saltaire Easter events in Area G. Are those CVRD sponsored events that are under the care and control of staff? Because it says that those are covered by insurance.
And to my knowledge, and looking to Mr. Farquhar, no, those are not. And I cannot, as I say, that our insurance policy does not list specific events, so I cannot verify.
And I
those
guess the
events
other
are
question I'd ask is to the alternate director for Area G. Have summer events been held there before, and how has that worked? And if they have been held before, why is it different this year?
Alternate Director Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is the first one of this event to be held in the summer. However, there was a Mother's Day event held by the area director this spring. And the Easter one and the Halloween ones have been going on for years without issues. Thank you.
So, Director Salmon, I've got myself on the list as well. Director Salmon.
So just to be clear, so did you say it could be supervised by staff or area director, or is that clear? Do we know?
Ms. Soldera.
So from the MIA's perspective, it needs to be a CVRD event. Should the board wish to appoint a director as having that level of responsibility for an event, I would caution the board that there's a lot of liability involved in having an event of the size that's proposed. And so that's why we generally try and go through our community organizations or make sure that staff, and quite a number of staff are involved in organizing the event so we can make sure our liability is covered.
So I've got myself on the list, then Director Nicholson. Just as for some context, there have been, I've availed myself of the ability to participate and organize events in the past. The Cowichan River Cleanup is one, and the rules have evolved to the point where essentially, in order for CVRD insurance to apply to an event, it has to be organized, care and control, and all of the ultimate decision and supervision has to fall on the CVRD as the organizer of the event. So for the last couple of years, the CVRD and directors, even though we participate in these events, have not extended this liability to the events, and the external NGOs have been providing their own insurance. There is a very inexpensive option that's available where we can be named as the additional insured, and that's a preferred way to go. Where I'm having a challenge in this particular one is the director isn't present in the room and able to provide me with the type of assurances that I would like to have as a member of this board to be comfortable with her delivery of this and supervision of this, and I don't know that I would be comfortable in declaring this a CVRD event to be in the sole hands of one director to be responsible for. And I would suggest that given that we have a little bit of time, this is August the 18th, that I wouldn't really even want to be considering this until the director was in the room and be able to provide us more scope and details. So I'll leave that out there and go to Director Nicholson next.
Yeah, just for some context, the Parks Commission in Area E has for many years held used community parks funds to hold a barbecue for the community at Glenora Trailhead Park and at Curry Park. And so the new rules are such that they would not be able to do that anymore because they're not an organization apart from being a CVRD commission. So I think the issue for us is putting together some clear policy on the level of risk that we're prepared to accept with communities using our facilities. I don't know, Mr. Elzinga, whether if you rent a room at the Cowichan Community Center for a meeting, if you have to have insurance, liability insurance. But, I mean, there's sort of a spectrum of levels of risk, and I think we need to be, yeah, I think we need to be sort of sensible about it, because you can go overboard. So what is our policy at rec centers, Mr. Elzinga?
Mr. Elzinga.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Managers at recreation centers have the discretion to waive liability insurance for small meetings only. So for every other event, they do require third-party liability insurance. But it has been a practice with Recreation Commission's knowledge that managers do have the responsibility for small meetings, 10 people or less, that they could waive the liability insurance requirement.
So,
follow up.
I'd just like to follow up. I just think that we need to work towards something that's sensible and, you know, practical, that works better for the community, because I think just this blanket, you got to have insurance, and we can't let you use our parks is not very friendly.
I wanted to go to Mr. Farquhar because they've got a fair bit of experience for rentals in parks. Can you give us some context as to the process that a user group would need to go through as far as using a park facility?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for context, as of now, we have had 50 park special event permit applications already come through our division for use of parks for various events sponsored by community groups and organizations, inclusive of the Caldwell Fair happening later in August. We've also had, to the extent of 80 notifications. These are birthday parties or small wedding events. Similar to our recreation centers, we have a level of discretion in terms of the scope and scale, what's proposed, and the level of risk. I refer to the high tea event referred earlier about the area director in Saltaire holding. That was basically looked at as a meet the director in the park event rather than meet the director at a local community center, because the level of risk and the numbers were quite low. So in terms of the application process, we, for larger events, have a whole form to fill out to give us a scope and understanding of what's taking place, to what degree they may be wishing to set things up in the park, the type of activities taking place. And we also require insurance to the tune of typically $2 million to indemnify the CVRD with a $5 million cap. For larger, more complex or higher risk events, we turn to MIA to advise us on where we might require a higher level of insurance. And we'd like to have these applications in as early as possible, so give staff time to evaluate and determine the scope of impacts or potential impacts on the park. And if required, we even refer these out to our advisory park commissions for their feedback as well.
Thank you. What's the will of the board? There's a motion. Is there a possible suggestion it be referred to the next meeting when Director Smith is here?
I'll second that.
Moved by Director Marcotte, seconded by Director Sebring. It's a motion to refer to the next board meeting. Any discussion on the propriety of referral? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. Next item. I believe we go down to question period. Are there any members of the public have any questions for the chair today?
Yes, hello, Mr. Chair, and thank you. My name is Sheila Paul. I'm from Shawnigan Lake. Pardon me. I won't be long. It's been a long day, and some of us diehards are here. One question. I have two questions. First, the one question, there was possibly some discussion about not having question period. So my question would be is if that is a consideration to please, could that be verified if?
Question period remains as is.
Okay, thank you. Because some of us are bridging the gap between North Cowichan and the CVRD, and I'm finding personally I'm being very stretched. There's a lot of stuff going on, and so I don't always catch stuff. Now, my number two question, and I'll just not expect an answer, but if some directors or board members would like to comment, I would really appreciate that. I did get some comments from one director. And that is the presentation, number two, the delegate today. Do any of you feel, I'm toying with how to verse this question, and pardon me for that. Do any of you believe that there was anything, never mind to the presenter? I looked at your huge documents for this, just this meeting, and I don't know, almost 100 pages from this PhD, Mr. Powell. So I'm just wondering if anybody thought there's anything to the G5, and if there isn't, I'm very concerned for all of us. I'm not making any things with the presenter, the lady who was here, because I don't know her, but I saw that on the agenda. I came because I'm cared about the traffic study, a lot of stuff. I'm very interested. I'm self-employed, why I can look at stuff. So I came to see the reaction, and I'm concerned. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to speak to the regional grants and aid. And I totally respect the board's decision to go down to zero. My question would be, a lot of these smaller organizations, when we're talking about budget functions, would be hard pressed to put forward a request for something in competition, say with the Cowichan Housing Association. So I really hope, and my question would be that the directors really consider upping their own grant needs and to help offset that loss of money, because $75,000 in the context of a $10 million budget is not huge, but it is huge to these smaller individuals. And my question would be, how is this going to be communicated to the public? Thank you.
My understanding is from the question that I posed in committee this morning, so I probably shouldn't be referring back to committee, but it will be communicated when we normally put out the calls for grants, that there will not be a regional grant and aid program if nothing changes between now and then.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the chair today?
Hi, Sheila Bell Irving from Shawnigan Lake, and I'm wondering if you're going to start handing out blankets for people in this room, because it's freezing and we are literally dressed for the weather outside, and it's colder in here than the Arctic during global warming. So if we could take the air conditioning up a little, like down a little bit, and make it so that we're not having to put on coats, scarves, or parkas, would be really nice. So could you, like, make it a more reasonable temperature for all of us, please?
See what we can do.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for the chair? Seeing none, we have closed session. Could we have a, Ms. Harrison?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could we get a motion that the meeting be closed to the public in accordance with Community Charter, Part 4, Division 3, Section 90, subsections as noted in accordance with each agenda item?
Moved by alternate director Goddard. Seconded by Director Nicholson. All those in favor? Opposed? We'll be ready to roll into that in a couple of minutes. Looks like everybody